Alright guys and gals, this is a long playing review for James Bond 007 in The Living Daylights, the computer game. To give it its full and rather long official title on the Amstrad CPC, released by Domark in 1987. Just quickly, some of you long-time viewers of mine may be thinking, hang on Xy, haven't you already done a similar video before? Well yes, I have, 15 years ago to be exact, in the good old bad days of YouTube, the Wild West of YouTube, where you could use bits of soundtrack and pop music in your videos. Of course now you can't, and those days are long behind us, and well, it's been heavily copyright claimed and blocked in many countries around the world because I used Aha's song, and attempts to remove the audio have left it in a scuffed state. It was a low quality video anyway. So here we are with a brand new video, and one with much more interesting stuff. Beyond the long play, we're going to have a little deep dive into some extraordinarily clever coding techniques used at the time for 1987. Quite beyond anything we'll see commercially released for some years, which is a shame given the gameplay of the bloody game. Plus, we'll have a good look at all the other versions and platforms this was released on too, for comparison. Which I think I'll do near the start of the video before we get to the actual long play, for once, because we're going to discuss first the gameplay problems with The Living Daylights, and also see if that continues across the formats and versions too. And you'll see why I left the long play till after. The technical discussion and coding techniques will be at the end. But before we get to all of that, fun stuff talking about the movie. Most of us should know this was the first of only 2 movies from Timothy Dalton, taking over from the long-running, beloved and more comedic Roger Moore, who was really showing his age in 1985's A View to a Kill. Dalton ushered in a more down-to-earth, tougher, brooding and realistic Bond. Also one a lot more in line with Fleming's novels, but also, more importantly, shifting attitudes and trends in the mid to late 80s. Some might say he paved the way for Daniel Craig's Bond. Dalton is a superb actor, and it's a shame he only got 2 films to show what he could do, because in my opinion they're 2 of the best in the long running series. Although perhaps at the time opinion was a little bit split, retrospectively, especially after the Craig years, they're definitely now looked upon very favourably. For me, The Living Daylights is probably my favourite of all the Bond movies, partially because of nostalgia, because it was one of the very first films I ever saw in a cinema at the Regal in my hometown, a beautiful 1930s structure that's still open to this day after a lovely revamp. And I was only 6 years old at the time when the film was released, and I loved it so much that my parents took me back and dropped me off at the cinema so many times to rewatch it that the people who owned it gave me posters and promotional art like a 3D cardboard cutout of the movie artwork that I still wish I had to this day. But I must have seen it at least 3 or 4 times as a kid, and it started my love of movies and especially Bond. Anyone else have Dalton as their favourite Bond? And so it was the same year I believe I got my very first computer, my beloved Amstrad CPC 464. Wow, what a year! It's no coincidence that one of the very first games that was bought for me was also the official tie-in game. This one, The Living Daylights. Sometime after September, shortly after it was released to shops. I can't honestly remember my impressions, feelings, and if I liked or enjoyed this game or not at the time. I mean, I was 6 years old and didn't know much, if any, better than the Amsoft games that came with the 464. So this probably looked amazing at the time. But as we can see from this normal footage, before we get to the long play, there is something wrong with the gameplay. This is how they, the coders, intend you to play it, I suppose. Shoot the sprites popping up in the background so they don't shoot back at you. Move on, then shoot the next batch of them. Except there's one big problem and major flaw. They don't stay down. They just keep coming back up. Almost immediately so. Therefore it begs the question, what's the point of shooting them? You can stay on basically the same screen forever shooting them. As soon as they pop up, and your energy will still drain down at the same rate compared to if you just run off to the right without bothering shooting at all and hope for the best. In fact, that's what you have to do for all of the Living Daylights levels, well, nearly all of them. Ignore the background enemies, run to the right and pray you make it. I think they even know this because by level 4 they start putting a boss enemy in the middle of your running path that you actually do have to shoot, blocking your progress. Honestly though, it's such a simple gameplay fix. Shoot a background enemy and set a timer that they don't pop up again for X amount of seconds. Job done. I assume though there wasn't enough memory left for that. Does the same thing happen on all the other versions on other computers? What do they play like? Let's find out now before we do our Amstrad Longplay. Let's stick with the Amstrad and go straight to the PCW version. Yeah, the Amstrad PCW got a port, and which appears to be a direct conversion of the Amstrad CPC one, but sadly without any music, as far as I know, unless I'm getting this emulated wrong, and in glorious green screen. Yeah, it's very green. And yup, unfortunately, it has all the same gameplay issues. You shoot at the enemies in the background, you hit them, and they don't stay down. They pop right back up again pretty quickly. And your energy also very quickly drains away too. So just like the CPC version, you're best to just leg it to the right and hope for the best. But it's very nice to see the PCW get a version and quite a prestigious license too. And it runs pretty decently. Just a shame about the minimal sound effects though. Now, on to the good old Specky, and we find the ZX Spectrum version is coded by the same team as the Amstrad, and it looks pretty similar, just in less colours, and music and sound effects are done via its beeper, so not as good. And well, we have the same gameplay issues too, it seems. You shoot the enemies and well, they keep on popping up, and your energy just gets zapped down. It's sometimes a little bit hard to make out the background enemies, so you're best avoiding them anyway. And it's worth mentioning that this version later got re-released as a light gun game in the famous James Bond 007 action pack, bundled with the ZX Spectrum Plus 2, and of course the Magnum Light Phaser light gun that Amstrad released at Christmas 1989, 3 years after buying out Sinclair. What is interesting is the coding techniques used in the game, which we'll discuss later, make it an ideal candidate for a light gun game. It also came out the same year as the Magnum light gun, which was released in 1987, so one does wonder if this was originally and initially earmarked as a potential light gun game. If you're wondering how you move Bond in the light gun version, well, you have to press the space bar and the game automatically moves him, including jumping over obstacles. It's all a bit odd. Anyway, also talking of coding things, here on the Specky, maybe some of the middle and lower parts of the scenery doesn't scroll quite as nicely here because the Amstrad's doing a hardware scroll for that. But we'll come to that later. But other than that, and a few other things mentioned before, they're pretty similar versions. Although, overall, I think the CPC version slightly edges it. Now, time for the MSX version. And it has the Amstrad's music, which is cool. Very nice. But when you get into the game, it's quite obviously a quick port of the ZX Spectrum version. Those poor MSX users had to suffer a lot of very quick, dirty ZX Spectrum ports, but I'm an Amstrad user growing up. We had to suffer them too. Often though, the specky ports to the MSX were often a lot worse than the specky ports to the Amstrad. This one seems to be not too bad, to be honest, but as you can see from the gameplay though, the problems are still there, of course. The enemies keep on popping up after you've shot them, and it's now the fourth version we've seen with the same gameplay issues. Yeah, so you're better off legging it to the right and hoping for the best. For a quick specky port though, it plays okay, but the MSX deserves better. Oh. The loading screen on the BBC Micro version is hilarious. Look at Kara's eyes! Dalton looks great though. It appears to be an early example of a digitised image. Very nice. Sadly though, it goes rapidly downhill from here. Looking and playing like none of the other versions we've seen so far, this truly is the Renegade Bond version, and it is truly dreadful. I'm really surprised this got through Domark's quality control and assessment and passed. And they decided to release this. They must really have been desperate to hit that BBC Micro market, I guess, with anything. Absolutely anything. It's like something a kid knocked up in their bedroom. It's not even budget release quality. Wow. I know they've got parallax scrolling carried across from the other versions. Hilariously though, they've also carried across the same gameplay problem. Like, shoot the enemies in the background and they still immediately respawn. What? I mean, really? Good lord. I mean, they carried that across? Oh my god. I mean, it's an utter embarrassment all around. Ugh. Oh dear. Oh dear. The BBC could do so much better. But I mean, I do apologise if the coder of the game is watching this video, but if you were very, very young when you were asked to code this game, I understand if you had time pressure constraints and stuff, but yeah, okay, but never mind. Let's move on. Okay. Onto the Atari 8-bit version, and yes, it's another version from different coders, but with the same bloody gameplay problem with the background enemies. Damn it, Domark! Now, I love the Atari 800XL. It was the first computer I properly gamed on round my best friend's house before I asked my parents to get me a computer, which led to me getting my Amstrad. And this was probably the last game my friend bought for his when it came out on budget from Zeppelin Games. I used to be in awe of his 800XL, and my memory recall is appalling these days, but I do have a distinct memory of seeing this game and version running and thinking at the time, blimey, this is rubbish. I'm glad I got my Amstrad. The XL and XE can do a lot better, but we know it's not the worst version. That honour goes to the BBC Micro we just saw. On to the Commodore 64 version. Now, there's a reason I saved the C64 version for last, and you'll see shortly. A good rendition of the music on the title screen and into the game. Nice animation on the Bond sprite, and we're shooting the enemies and taking them out. Let's see what happens. And they're not immediately respawning. And we're not overwhelmed by them. And my NG levels are good. This is how it should be. And should have been on the other versions. They've actually got the gameplay right on the C64 version. And at last, we've found a working Living Daylights game. Wow. Although a couple of minor criticisms, the jumping is pretty jank on the C64 version, and they still don't recharge your energy at the end of the bloody level, which is annoying. But everything moves very smoothly here too, from the parallax scrolling to Bond's aiming reticule or crosshair. But other than the janky jumping, which isn't as fluid as the Amstrad CPC versions, which is the only down here, this is great and by far now the best version, and how it flipping should be. You take out all the enemies, or rather they're not really enemies on this first level. This is the SAS soldiers, and you take them out with your paint gun. But you take out all the guys on one screen, clear them off, and then move to the next screen, and you're not overwhelmed by them. And I'm not being super accurate here, and I've still got enough energy left to get to the end of the level. And there's the KGB guy in grey. But this is how it should have been. Oh, have we got? See, just clear off the last few enemies to take out the final guy here, and we did it. That's how it should be. That's how it should have been. This is why we left the C64 version to last, to show you this is how it should have been. But unfortunately, they've still got the problem of they don't restore your energy at the end of the flipping level. Oh well. But anyway, this is how the Living Daylights should have been, and that makes me sad. A simple gameplay tweak on the Amstrad version, and it could have easily stood shoulder to shoulder with this C64 one. A licensed game of my favourite Bond film. Oh well. Anyway, so now you've seen all the versions, including the best one here, with how the gameplay should be. Let's now get on with the Amstrad Longplay and the unfortunate way on how you have to beat the game. What I haven't mentioned yet so far is the game actually follows the plot of the movie reasonably well for the time, and for such a confusing story in a Bond film to follow. The Living Daylights is my favourite, that I've watched more than any other, and even I forget how to explain and how to remember everything that happens in it, so I'll just stick to what we see in the game when we get to the levels. Oh, we get a credit screen here, which is actually really useful for me, because I can find out who did everything in the game. And the coding and graphics were by Graham Stafford and David Fish of Walking Circles, and they often work together on lots of games. I think sharing both graphics and coding duties together. Before they became Walking Circles, they were originally part of Design, making games like 2012 AD, Nexor and On the Run. The latter two appeared on Amstrad action cover tapes. Some notable games that either worked on together after or separately include APB, Nosferatu the Vampire, Skull and Crossbones, Spitting Image, Hot Rod and Cat Trap for Domark. And Cat Trap looks like it uses the same mode split techniques as the Living Daylights but doesn't scroll. We'll talk more on that later. The designer of the game was Richard Naylor, and it's interesting that there was a game designer back in the day of the mid-80s. That's kind of more of a modern thing. Just there to purely design the game, which he did at Domark for two other games based on TV shows, The Krypton Factor and Every Second Counts. Wow. I could find only one other credit for him as doing a coding conversion of David Perry's Extreme from the CPC version for digital integration, which is a bit unusual because David Perry normally handled that himself, and I can't find any other credits for Richard up to that point, but that may have been the start of his coding career. Looking on Moby Games, after that he went on to do Game Boy stuff. And music and sound effects by the always ever reliable and excellent David Whittaker, with a very memorable if short tune and jingles from him, but no Bond theme. Anyway, let's kick things off on level 1, Gibraltar, and let's get running. And this is kind of like a very condensed version of the opening sequence of the film with a different ending. With Bond on a training mission on the Rock of Gibraltar, with the SAS shooting him with paint guns. That's why we've got a paint gun selected bottom left corner. Except there's a Russian spy there too, out to kill. So switch to your Wolf for PPK. There he is in black. And shoot him at the end. Pretty clever actually. And sometimes it can go on a lot longer and be pretty tense. There's actually quite a good moment in the game then. I'll choose the night vision goggles here, which look a bit like binoculars for some weird reason. They're at the theatre, darling. But you can switch them on there. And look, it switches from night to sort of like a nice lighter colour. But unfortunately, we die very quickly. You don't get any energy back at the start of the level. Just to make matters worse. To make matters even worse, if that energy being lost on the previous level can carry on happening at the start of the next. You see your energy draining and you haven't even been shot yet. To rub salt into the wounds. Anyway, so here, Bond is now escorting a defecting Russian General Koskov outside a concert hall in Bratislava, Czechoslovakia. Supposedly protecting him from snipers, but we're just legging it here. What a load of rubbish. Alright, level 3. Choose the hard hat to protect you from falling debris. We'll find us still with Koskov, but at the start of the Trans-Siberian Pipeline. It says industrial complex, but... And where Koskov will be bundled inside some capsule and sent down the tubes all the way to the west somewhere safe. You don't see it happening in game though, but this level makes a nice change of pace because you're jumping over and rolling under pipes, whilst dodging smaller ones dropped by the workers on the walkways above. I hope he chose the hard hat at the start of the level and applied it, but a kudos to the C64 version, the only version that changes the sprite to show you actually wearing it. Otherwise, I assume I'm wearing it here, and we just made it there. Right, level 4, and I choose what I guess is the rocket launcher, the bazooka here. Shame the Ghetto Blaster wasn't the weapon being chosen, because that was famously demoed by Q in the film. We select it there and blow up this guy here. And we're in good old Blighty here, which is an MI6 safe house or mansion where Koskov is held up. But the Russians are here to snatch him back. Specifically the deadly Necros, who's disguised as a milkman with some deadly explosive milk bottles. You also now have an enemy in your way blocking your progress for the first time. And I think this is where the coders pretty much acknowledge the background enemies just aren't working and give up making you shoot them if that was the intention, because you have no time to do so, especially now with the helicopter. Dropping bombs at you. Alright, next level. The crossbow. Choose the crossbow. Spike never seen it in the movie. And we're now in Vienna at the fair. Koskov's defection was fake and a British agent has been killed by Necros, who's left a balloon with a message on it at the scene. They weren't explosive balloons though in the movie, so maybe this level was a miscommunication because Necros appears to have a bunch of explosive balloons, rather confusingly. And he survived the last level. And so just use the crossbow. Only the crossbow can take out the balloons. But he can't kill Necros here. Choose the well for PPK and move on. Right, okay. Level 6. Select the gun with the tranquilizer or sleeper darts. Again, another weapon or gadget not in the movie, but hey ho. And you're escaping the authorities and police in Tangiers here on the rooftops. After faking the assassination of a different Russian General Pushkin, which was Koskov's plan all along, or something. Like level 4 be accurate and fast, but now you have the added complexity of jumping over the rooftops. Another nice little change up in the levels. Notice how each level has been slightly different each time. They're really trying here, guys and girls, they're trying. We still have background enemies draining our health, but there's no time to deal with them at all. I'm already making it through the levels here. There's only 8 levels, by the way. Right, level 7. Strangely, choose the bazooka again for the Afghanistan level, which is called Military Complex. The famous keyring you used to escape isn't available here, although I suppose it would have been an odd choice given the action coming up here. Although Bond with the bazooka is still an odd pairing, even though we probably have seen it in a film somewhere. Pretty much this is a rehash of level 4, but twice as long, and where they ran out of ideas. But at least on this level you can finally kill Necros here. Sometimes they rotate the weapons around on that screen, just keep you on your toes. But yeah, so how you choose the weapon is you bring your reticle on screen, move it down to the bottom right corner, press fire, and it chooses the weapon. You see it change in the bottom left corner. Oh, you have to be super accurate. Look how much the energy drains down, but you cannot take a single, well, you can take maybe 1, maybe 2 hits from Necros, and his weapon he throws across the screen. It takes, what, about a third of your energy? Ooh, maybe a quarter of your energy. Look at that, I've only got 1 life left. I'm trying to make sure I hit him the first time, because it takes a long time to reload the bazooka. Oh! No! No more lives left after this. So this was gonna be a close run. How did the helicopter not blow up Necros there? That's not fair. That's not fair. Again, ignore the background enemies. Oh, I missed. The coders clearly gave up. By level 4 anyway, of you taking out the background enemies. They knew it wasn't working. Now, last level. No cues left to select a weapon. You're taken straight into Whitaker's house for the final showdown with the actual villain of the film. Just quickly kill him and duck under his weapon he's thrown. A knife attack. I think it's a knife, and with 1 hit with the bazooka, he's a goner. Mission completed. And a disappointing ending. The Prime Minister thanks you. You've killed Whitaker. I suppose it's in keeping with probably what James Bond gets rewarded with. He has to go off and make his own fun. Now, magazine review scores. I always tend to look for the review in Amstrad Action, the main Amstrad mag back in the day, and this was reviewed in the September 1987 issue 24 of Amstrad Action magazine, and they seem to think it was okay, but I'm dubious if they play tested it much. Rather, they gave it a few quick goes and rushed a review out here. They do of course mention as their main criticism that most of the characters who pop out of the scenery, it's impossible to avoid their bullets, and therefore the element of skill is diminished, which is absolutely spot on. But that's really the only mention. Elsewhere they contradict themselves and say it's been well designed and is a pleasure to play in the second opinion box. Oh well. Anyway, they rated the graphics at 70%, Sonic's at 66%, which for both seems a bit low, and twice they mentioned the Bond theme music, but the tunes don't have any callbacks at all to the famous Bond theme. Anyway, grab factor at 71%, staying power at 65%, with an overall AA rating of 68%. Strange score given the review seemed rather glowing, but it's a typical of Amstrad Action reviews of the time. 90% of the review taken up by talking about the story of the game and what happens in it, and then 1 solitary paragraph at the end critiquing the actual game. Otherwise it's actually a fairly sensible and reasonable score. Now, as for my review, I have to admit that the shootout with the KGB spy at the end of the first level is tense and cool when it goes on for a bit. The night vision goggles on level 2 are also a nice, if in the end a pointless touch. But yeah, as mentioned already, it's good that each level slightly changes things up each time. The jumping and rolling under pipes of your hard hat on level 3. The level 4 suddenly introduces a baddie in your path and a mad helicopter bombing. Level 5 has you dealing with exploding balloons. Level 6 is a rooftop chase, and then it runs out of steam. They really stretched their game engine to the limit, trying different things to do. Obviously helped by the movie script, which gave them inspiration that drove them on, without which I doubt we'd have such crazy things if it wasn't for the movie license. I really like the graphics in this. They've done exceptionally well in mode 1, going beyond the 4 colour limit, and with parallax scrolling, all done extremely fast and smoothly. And that's all due to some very clever coding techniques, which we're going to talk about shortly after the review. But combine that with the nice presentation and excellent, memorable, if short, jingles and music from David Whittaker. I mean, all of those jingles are forever embedded in my brain and you just won't ever forget them. And despite not being the Bond theme, they do just suit a Bond game ever so well. Anyway, as I was saying, combine that all together and this is a great package. However, it's all let down by a serious gameplay flaw that I've already discussed to death earlier in the video. The issue of the background enemies. That isn't an issue in the C64 version and the only version of the game. For what could have been a game in the mid to high 80%ers if it was fixed in the Amstrad version, unfortunately that drags it way down, and I suppose I'm not too far off Amstrad action score. But since seeing all the clever coding that went into this and just enjoying all the great graphics, presentation and music, I'll raise their score up a little to maybe around 71%. So that's my score, or a 7 out of 10 if you like. So there you go, that's my review. Now, finally, on to the last part of the video, the technical discussion. The Living Daylights is unusual and fairly unique in that it uses a mixture of clever screen coding techniques to achieve how it looks and moves, and is very rarely seen combined together in other games on the Amstrad. And it's set up in Amstrad's Mode 1 screen mode, which is normally limited to a maximum of 4 colours. But here we can see they actually have 8 colours on screen. And also some very nice, fast and smooth moving scrolling with layers of parallax in the background to go with it too. Now, what have they done here to achieve it all? But without access to the original source code, we can't know for definite. But with debugging tools and knowledge learned within the community over many years, we can make some very accurate guesses. Firstly, it starts with interrupts. The Amstrad has an interrupt that goes off every 300th of a second, 6 times per frame, or every 52 scan lines, which you can sync to with it being the fastest clock you can do on the CPC. Now, interrupts are a way to temporarily suspend the Z80 CPU at regular points and do things with some code, right? We can see it happening on this screenshot, and they have set up and used 6 interrupts. And it's these interrupts that the coders, Graham Stafford and David Fish, have used to both place their screen splits, called ruptures, and then also change the palette colours within them to give us the 8 colours on screen. Very clever. With the palette changes, you can see originally this was the usual 4 colours, and then rasters were used in each of the screen splits to change the palette within them. More on that shortly. So, very clever again. As for the scrolling, now this is very difficult to achieve because there's essentially 3 different areas being scrolled here within the ruptures and screen splits. In level 1, for example, the first is the mountains being the slowest. Secondly, the middle area where Bond is running, it's slightly faster. And lastly, the third area at the bottom with the bushes scrolling the fastest for a nicely layered parallax effect. And it must be using a hardware scroll for this, utilising the Amstrad CRTC video chip. CRTC stands for Cathode Ray Tube Controller. Anyway, so you first disable VSync, vertical synchronization, which normally would result in absolute chaos on the screen, but not here. And with careful coding and timing, you're going to tell the chip, because you've done a rupture or screen split, to output a much smaller screen on one of your interrupts. And of course you've changed the palette colours too, just to make things more complex. Then you move down onto your next screen split and so on, including the HUD, heads up display, where your score, lives and more are at the bottom. When all that's completed, and fingers crossed you've got all your timings correct, you re-enable the VSync and pray the monitor likes it. For those interested in terms of the hardware scrolling techniques being used here, the CRTC chip has registers you can change to define the start address of the screen, which are registers 12 and 13, known as R12 and R13. And it looks like this is what the coders are using here. So, why hasn't all the above been used more in other Amstrad games? Possibly because it was discovered that it was hard to ensure it worked on all Amstrad CPC models due to different revisions of the CRTC chip over time. On what is known as CRTC 1 model, the Living Daylights actually glitches and becomes unstable, and some of the HUD appears in the middle of the game area. It's likely the coders didn't know about this revision and were coding on a CRTC 0, the most common model. By the late 80s, this bug, or known difference, was probably more well known about, and coders didn't want to deal with the headache of making sure it worked with the CRTC 1 model. Additionally, the usage of rasters to change the palette colours in-game cause additional complexities on top of the screen splits and ruptures. Coders under severe time pressure from publishers and their bosses to turn around games, especially conversions of licensed properties, simply wouldn't have the time to go to these lengths for their games, often given 2 or 3 weeks on an Amstrad conversion, and would have taken easier routes to complete their projects for a deadline. So there you go. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you want to see more like this, do consider supporting me on Patreon and joining the Am Squad. And thank you to lots of knowledgeable people on the CPC Wiki forums for their input on the technical discussion regarding the Living Daylights. It was definitely a very interesting chat, and I think we all have a newfound respect for the game and the coders behind it. Thank you all for watching, and goodbye. Bye.
So thanks for watching, guys. I hope you enjoyed that. If you did, please click a like below, leave a comment, and also subscribe if you haven't already. And over that way, there's another video for you to check out. Xyphoe out.